Welcome to the Week 5 IDP Blitz. Sigmund Bloom here with Matt Schauf, Schaufds. You can find him on Twitter. We should call this week the safety dance, Matt. And I suppose let's start with John Johnson, who was quite a force in IDP leagues with the Rams. What's going on with him in a Browns uniform?
I'm going to try to focus now, but you got that song going through my head. Plus, I've had trouble focusing all day because I just learned that high school yearbooks cost $62 now.
What?
So that's what I said. $29 in middle school, $62 in high school. Apparently that one extra grade is where the big money comes in. But
I got to get in that racket. Let's forget about fantasy football analysis.
No kidding. I apparently high school yearbooks are NFTs, I guess. But people are not here for that. They're here to escape that stuff. So let's get to John Johnson. And if you're a John Johnson owner, you probably want to escape that right now. So a lot of times early in the season, we look at guys who have been good for a while and we say, be patient, things are going to work out. I don't think that's the case with John Johnson III, not to be confused with any other John Johnson you might have in your IDP lineup. He's outside the top 100 DBs right now. And the big issue for John Johnson, who's in his first year with Cleveland, is the box snaps just aren't there anymore. He has spent 23 of his 233 total defensive snaps in the box, and I include the D-line snaps that Pro Football Focus parses out in those box snaps. That's 10% of his total. He spent another 8.1% of his snaps in slot coverage. Those are really the two areas that we want our safeties to be, where it's easiest for them to put up numbers. Compare that with last year with the Rams. He spent 43% of the time in the box. That's versus 10% so far this year, 23% in slot coverage. So both of those numbers are way down, and so are his fantasy numbers. And that's why I don't expect them to rebound. Last year was right in line with his other years with the Rams. So he was simply playing all over the place more, playing in the box more, seeing slot coverage more with the Rams than he is with the Browns so far. This year, only Quandre Diggs and Trayvon Mayrig have played more snaps than Johnson and spent less time in the box. So that's where he stands among box safeties. And, you know, that's a little heads up for Quandre Diggs, whose numbers have been pretty good fantasy-wise so far, but might be tough for him to sustain his production, although the Seahawks have been spending a lot of time on the field on defense so far.
What's the pivot here? Is it Ronnie Harrison? Is it Grant Delpit? Or is it just stay away from the Brown safeties?
I think Ronnie Harrison's a better pickup than John Johnson, and he should be back. It sounds like he didn't have a concussion. I'd like to know how he presented a concussion initially on Sunday and then didn't have one on Monday, but that's beside the point. Grant Delpit is still going to be limited playing time-wise as long as Ronnie Harrison is back and ready to go.
All right, let's go through a few other underperforming safeties. He have the franchise tag, Justin Simmons, and then the big extension. What about him in Denver?
Yeah, so let's subtitle this whole section why you don't draft defensive backs early, why you don't chase last year's leaders. But Justin Simmons, I'm not so much worried about as I am John Johnson. He's DB 61 in fantasy points so far. Obviously, it depends on your format a bit. He has also seen less time in the box, but I don't think it's because of a change in role. It seems more like because the Broncos have won more games lately to start this season than they did in previous seasons. So if we look back at previous years, he's been right around 50% in the box as Justin Simmons for the Broncos. That's fluctuated some. It was 57% in 2020. It was 39% in 2018, where he spent a lot more time in slot coverage because the Broncos were struggling at cornerback that year. But overall, he hovered around 50%. This year, he's only been in the box for 21.8%, in the slot for 11.3%, free safety for 67%. Now, if we look at what the Broncos have done so far, they've won 3 games handily, and then they lost to Baltimore. Against Baltimore, Justin Simmons spent 43% of the time at free safety. So it was in the box, in slot coverage, a lot more in that game where they were trailing, where he wasn't sitting back just trying to play prevent for the second half of the game. I think going forward, the Broncos will be a lot closer to 500 than they will be to undefeated. So I'm going to bet on more box time for Justin Simmons and bet that he rebounds in fantasy scoring.
What about Jordan Poyer from the Bills? More time on the sidelines?
As long as he can come back. First of all, he sprained his ankle, and then he went bouncing off the field after winning that game where he sprained his ankle. So he fooled those of us watching into thinking his ankle would be fine the following week. I would hope that means he at least won't be out long. So we'll watch that. That's the biggest thing. Otherwise, his scoring has been okay, so we don't need to be too alarmed. He's outside the top 30 in points per game, though, which is not great for a guy drafted where we probably picked him. The Bills have faced the second fewest defensive plays so far. They're also allowing a league low 4.0 yards per play, and they have spent a good bit of time leading. They lost, of course, week 1 to Pittsburgh, have won 3 games since then. Guess which game was the game where Jordan Poyer spent more time in the box than the others? It was that loss to Pittsburgh. So far overall, he's way up in free safety snaps. Maybe that'll keep being the case if the defense keeps playing well, if they keep winning games. But I think overall, Jordan Poyer will ultimately be fine for IDP lineups.
Ultimately, what are we going to do with Jessie Bates, who usually is in the middle of everything in the Cincinnati defense?
Jessie Bates' injury we'll have to watch. He missed Thursday's game, but it doesn't seem like a long-term deal. At this point, if a guy doesn't get put on IR when he's about to miss a game, then we don't really need to worry too much at the time, because teams do that if they expect the guy to miss 3 games. Bates has actually spent a little bit more time, slightly more time in the box than usual, but that's not what we go after with him. We chase the coverage plays, and they just simply haven't come for him yet. He's played in 3 games. He has no passes defensed. Over the previous 3 years, 31 passes defense, 9 interceptions. Those are going to come. Jessie Bates is still young. He hasn't forgotten how to play in coverage. So stick with him and expect the numbers to follow.
Stick with Kevin Byard, once IDP stud in the Titans secondary.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of like with the numbers we talked about with Justin Simmons so far. There are differences in what we've seen before, but all the kind of differences are going against Kevin Byard right now. The Titans have seen the 7th fewest defensive snaps so far, so there's regression in that. There's regression potential in that. The team overall is down 11 tackles per game versus last year's average. It's down about 6 total tackles per game, short of its lowest season average in the time since Kevin Byard entered the starting lineup for Tennessee. That was back in 2017. So the whole team is getting fewer tackles so far this year. Byard's role hasn't changed. He's been in the box for about the same amount of time as we've seen before. His tackle shares are down slightly, 7.1% of the team's solo tackles so far, 7.2% of the total tackles. That's down a little bit from where he usually is. It's down more versus what he did in 2020. But again, the role is the same. So if the team spends more time on the field, his number should come up some. I would imagine that the tackle shares will balance out some as well. So he's not somebody that you need to cling to if there are better options on the waiver wire. But if you're in a deep league and considering and wondering whether you just need to cut bait, I think Kevin Byard will ultimately be okay.
And lastly, rounding it out in our don't draft defensive backs early segment, really that's most of the show, the safety dance. Can we get like $1 per IDP point calculation for Jamal Adams?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm bright enough to make that.
Get your slide rule out, yeah.
Especially after I spent all my money on yearbooks. But for Jamal Adams, he might be the best example of why not to go buy last year's top finisher at DB, because he's doing okay. He's DB 26 right now, but that's disappointing if you drafted him first or second among safeties, among defensive backs. His issue, like John Johnson, is a change in role. Jamal Adams had 17 pass rushing attempts so far through 4 games, according to Pro Football Focus. That's just 4.25 per game. And even that average is inflated by 9 pass rushes in week 2 against Tennessee. So overall, he's getting even fewer opportunities than that to get after the quarterback. And that was the biggest factor in his difference in fantasy production last year. He averaged 8.15 pass rushes per game last season, and even that number was trending down late in the year as the Seattle pass rush got better. Clearly, the Seahawks like their other pass rush options better at this point. I think Darrell Taylor's emergence has helped in that area as well. So I would expect us to keep seeing fewer pass rushing opportunities for Jamal Adams. He's going to pop up for a sack here and there, but I wouldn't expect him to come in droves the way they did the past 2 years for the Seahawks and for the Jets. He still ultimately will be fine for fantasy usage, but if you're playing the kind of league where safeties can get traded, he might be a good guy to try to go ahead and unload before the rest of the league realizes that he's not going to hit 6+ sacks again.
Okay, it's too late to unload Jeremy Chinn and Landon Collins on the hopes that people would think they would score in line with their previous heights. What lies ahead, at least in the near term, for this pair of safeties?
Yeah, we focused on Jeremy Chinn last week, so I think looking back on that game at Dallas, it was better. He had 6 tackles, 5 solos, still just okay numbers. But the downfall there, I think, was less play volume from the Cowboys than we would have guessed, or at least I would have guessed.
Yeah.
Only 56 offensive plays from the Cowboys, and after that week 1 where they went monster pass heavy, they've leaned toward the run. They've been in the bottom half of the league in terms of pass rate in neutral situations over the past 3 weeks. So I think that's a matchup note to keep in mind for Dallas going forward, more than it is any kind of warning sign for Jeremy Chinn, who I still think will be okay going forward. Oh, and then
Landon Collins, yeah.
You teed him up for me. He finally got full playing time in week 4. Now, we'll see whether that becomes a trend because it came against a Falcons offense that is throwing deep at a lower rate than any other team in the league so far. 5.7% of their total pass attempts, according to PFF. So that's a matchup that should be good for Landon Collins' playing time, and it was. This week is New Orleans. They're also on the low side of throwing the ball deep. They are a run-heavy offense, so it should be another good spot for Landon Collins to stay on the field a lot. So I would expect that we get lots of Landon Collins playing time this week, and then I guess we'll see beyond that if it's been matchup driven or if they've been building him up to this full playing time thing.
And we have seen also the Dolphins safeties. This is a team kind of like the Browns in a sense where we have 3 safeties that we're thinking about. Do we have anybody? We have maybe Ronnie Harrison in Cleveland. Is there anybody in Miami safety group that we can count on in IDP leagues?
Brandon Jones went from his Jamal Adams impression 2 weeks ago to playing 2 snaps last week. And apparently his problem is that he doesn't know how to cover, which is kind of important for playing safety. So we shouldn't.
Would have been good to know when they took him, like in the 2nd round, 3rd round? Yeah.
I was just reading about him this morning, and they drafted him. I think they drafted him like round 6, knowing that he didn't cover very well. And they were like, he's fast. We'll see if he can develop. Apparently it hasn't really happened. So they'll bring him in for some pass rush attempts, but otherwise not going to play a whole lot. So we saw Jason McCourty's playing time rebound last week versus week 3. He's been at 89% or better in 3 of his 4 games. So I think Jason McCourty is the best bet among Dolphins safeties right now. Nobody is a must play, but Jason McCourty I think is the best bet, especially against Tampa and then Jacksonville the next 2 weeks. Eric Rowe has also rebounded the past 2 weeks versus his low point in week 2 of 40% playing time. He also has yet to reach 89%, that mark that I mentioned for Jason McCourty, in any of his 4 games. So there's some upside to the next 2 matchups, but also a low floor for Eric Rowe.
I'm just pointing this out, honestly, because I remembered this wondering, why did Miami take Brandon Jones with the 70th pick of the draft last year? The 70th pick, ahead of one Julian Blackman, by the way, who looks like he is going to be really good, and Terrell Burgess, who I thought was going to get some more playing time for the Rams this year. But we'll see. It was a great safety class last year. It was a great safety class on this show. L'Jarius Sneed also, now a cornerback. I just like saying L'Jarius Sneed, one of the legends of Northern Louisiana, a legend of IDP world and the fantasy world. Matt Schauf, always enjoy having him join us. Every other week, we flipped up the order. Keep you on your toes, everybody out there. But we got the IDP Blitz coming at you every Wednesday afternoon on our YouTube channel. You want to know when we're going to go live? You can subscribe. You can get notifications. Please comment on the videos, like the videos. And again, Matt has been doing great work at Draft Sharks for years, SCHAUFDS. We love you because you play IDP fantasy football, the only real fantasy football. Keep your eye off the ball. Sometimes you miss a lot of the best part of the game, but not when you check out all the IDP content at Football Guys and Draft Sharks and all around the fantasy football sphere. We like sharing it with you because you're so classy.